Hello, and welcome to Let's Connect. I'm Glenn Crooks. On this show, we explore the connections that we have with one another. We talk about why they're important and how to do it better. I'm excited today to introduce you to someone who has a great idea about how to do it better by encouraging others. And here's some good news. If you encourage someone who needs it, it's not only good for them, it's good for you too. My guest today is Dale Power. Dale is the founder of the Encouragement Project. As you might imagine, she's an expert on encouragement. She calls it rocket fuel that makes the impossible possible. Dale, welcome and thank you for being here today. To begin, I want everyone watching to get to know you a bit. So tell us a bit about you and what your life has been like.
Okay. Well, I was born in Chicago and spent the first 8 years of my life there and moved to Wayne and grew up here mostly. I have lived in other cities. I've lived in New York. I've lived in Lancaster, PA, and Charlotte, which gives me a little bit of background in other places and geographies, which is pretty interesting when you see how different they are. And I went to Villanova University, and then I was one of those kids that was kind of a square peg, and it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do. And I tried a lot of things that didn't fit for a while. And then I just decided to start my own businesses. So
you've had some creative careers. I have to admire, and I'm envious of one. You were actually a clown.
Yes, I was a professional clown before clowns became evil. I had a company called Clowning Around, which was a lot of fun.
Now, you were a mom at that time,
yes,
with young children.
Yes.
And as I recall from our conversation when we were getting ready for this today, you had a partner,
yes,
who as well was a mom with young children.
Yes.
And you did children's parties, but you did more than that.
Yeah, we did. We taught in the TE schools. We did corporate events. We did a few club events, which were really scary. And we just had an immense amount of fun doing it.
But that wasn't the only creative thing you did. You also had a catering business.
I did. When we were in Charlotte, that was my first business. It was called A Movable Feast, and I found out that I still loved to cook, but I hated catering, especially with two kids.
Well, you know, we share a lot in common. I grew up right outside of Chicago.
Oh, gosh.
And like you, I've lived in small towns and in big cities, and but there's also something else, and that is like perhaps many women in our generation at that age, we didn't get a lot of encouragement in high school.
Right.
So what was your story there?
Well, my father was probably pretty worried about what I was going to do in college and after. So at the end of high school, he had me take a career inventory, and the results came out that I was in the 98th percentile in executive management, and I was told I could be a secretary, which there's nothing wrong with secretaries, but the skill set is about 180 degrees away from management.
So then, let's fast forward a bit though. So you go to college anyway, and now then you're a mom and you're an entrepreneur with a very creative streak,
yes,
I would say.
Yeah.
But then you have a particular experience at the Woodland School. Perhaps you could tell the audience a little bit about the Woodland School, but in particular, what happened there?
Well, one of my kids got to Woodland. He had been literally falling out of 5th grade and not doing well at all, and we knew we had to find a different setting for him. He was bright, and he would bring his pencil and his paper, but not his book or any combination thereof. And so his organizational skills were really killing him and his success in school. So we found Woodland. We were so grateful to find it. And as I met parents when we were very new, I kept hearing the same story. And they would say, "We are so glad to be at this school. We're so glad we found this school. It's been so great. But our child still needs a reading specialist, a tutor, whatever, fill in that blank." And those people are kind of under the radar. Those are word of mouth recommendations that not everybody knows, and they certainly don't know how to assess how to pick them. And I noticed at the same time, because I had a marketing background by then too, that the school had just moved into a new location. They had a mortgage, and nobody knew who they were. There are 150 private schools in 50-mile radius in Philadelphia, which is really rare.
Yeah.
And so there's some competition. And I made an appointment with the headmaster and said, I think I know how to get this school known. And he said, I'm all ears. And I said, I'd like to write a book about finding help. And he said, you've got a job. And I said to myself, well, how hard is it to write a book? I found out. So I put that together. It took me about a year. I interviewed everyone in it and spent a lot of time really building that community or network. And what was great was it hit all their target markets. It hit the professional community that refers out, the school community that's telling parents, Johnny can't come back to this school, but you might look at these other schools, and the parents that just basically need it because they are too young to know. And it was really successful. We sold a lot of copies. We almost gave them away. We gave them away just above the cost.
What I like about that from a connection perspective is that it is very hard oftentimes for people to know where to go.
Absolutely.
And,
yeah.
Word of mouth takes you only so far.
Right.
So being able to have that sort of final bit of almost due diligence that you did in talking to everybody could be really very helpful. But the Woodland School was also the birth of the Encouragement Project.
It was.
I was very taken with a story you told about watching kids change after morning assemblies that would be held. I think that would be an important lesson for a lot of people to hear about.
Okay, well, I think I noticed it because I was pointed outside in the world, and the faculty is concentrating on the kids. But the new kids kind of come in very unsure and not feeling very good about themselves because they haven't done well in other settings, even though they're very bright. They're at least average to above average intelligence, and they make a lot of decisions about that failure, about themselves. And so they come in with defensive body language. I would say that's the best descriptor. And the second year I was there, about the third week, I started to notice that body language changing. And all of a sudden, kids were making eye contact. They were saying hello in the halls, and I wasn't teaching, so they had no particular reason to say hello. They were looking happier, and I thought that was remarkable. Woodland had a great culture of encouragement on every level, and it ran right straight through K through 12, and it affected the faculty and the staff as well as the kids.
One of the things that I was intrigued by is that at the school-wide assembly, teachers would line the room and actually call out accomplishments of children.
Yes,
I mean,
different kids every day.
That's an amazing, social validation.
Yes.
I can understand that would have an impact. Was something similar done for teachers? I mean, did teachers get that same sort of encouragement from the administrators or from each other?
I think so. Yeah, it was a very supportive environment. Yeah.
Well, so that's when it was born and started, but like a lot of things that get started, they toddle around for a while. That's children learning to walk and crawl and all of that, and then finally run. So 5 years ago, something happened that really accelerated the development of this project. What was that?
Well, just to back up a little, I got nagged by this idea of encouragement that whole time. And then 5 years ago, on a Sunday morning, I went down to the Academy of Fine Arts to see a brilliant exhibit, and my phone rang. And my family typically does not call me Sunday morning. And the voice on the other end was a fellow that had been a good friend at Villanova, and I hadn't talked to him in at least 30 years, lost track of him. And he said, I'm calling to say thank you. And I said, what are you thanking me for? And he said, you saved my life, and I wanted to make sure I said thank you. I went, wow, can you remind me what I did? And he said, you got me off drugs. And I said, wow, I have no memory of you being on drugs. And he said, I was smoking weed. I wasn't serious about my studies, but you knew I wanted to go to medical school. And he said, you sat me down and had a pretty serious talk with me about that. And he said, I gave up the weed and started working. He said, my grades weren't good enough the first 2 years to get into American medical schools. But he said, I went to Mexico. And he said, I came back to Chicago and took my boards, passed them the first time, and 3 years in, the University of Chicago invited me to teach in their medical school. Then Sloan Kettering called and gave me a brilliant fellowship, and several years after that, Harvard invited me to teach. And he said, I'm at the top of my career in Boston, and I went, holy cow. This is a great encouragement story, and I think this is the fuse that needed to be lit for me to do something.
Wow, that's an amazing
It's a great story, yeah.
One of the things that I'm going to quote you from
Oh, boy.
our earlier discussion. Well, and it's about mindfulness. There's so many people today who are thinking about mindfulness. There are mindfulness seminars in workplaces,
right.
in churches, and for clubs and networking groups,
everywhere.
and so on. And it's really an important skill, but I think you've taken mindfulness to the next level in the Encouragement Project. Here's what you said. You said, we all think we're good people, but when we make it intentional, it changes everything.
Right.
And that was a big aha for me, is to say that there's a way to be mindful about encouraging and bringing encouragement in to that dynamic. And that to me is rocket fuel.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you could talk some about that.
Sure. Well, I think that, as you said, quoting me, we think we're good people, but we are good when we think of it. And it's random. And so when we make it intentional, when we create a practice around it, starting with the beginning of every day, then it's a game changer. And when you encourage, if you go out and encourage someone, if you can identify who needs encouraging or who would benefit from that, the best part about it is you can't even imagine what it does for you. I mean, it's great for the other people, for the people you're encouraging, but it's phenomenal for you, for the person that is the encourager.
So talk about a typical day, like you say, if you could even start your day that way. If somebody wanted to embrace this as a practice, how should they then re-envision their day?
Okay, well, I would say I start my day with quiet and some prayer every day, and not everybody does that, but I am a great list maker. So I like to keep lists in the car because that's when I get up some of my best ideas. And so, the typical people that you know your friends who need encouraging, that's easy. That's the easy list. The harder list is who's new in my life? Who's new in the neighborhood? Who just found out they have a serious health issue? Who's a caretaker? Who needs maybe some time or some encouragement themselves, because that's a tough job? Who needs a friend? I just posted a post today on Facebook about a friend that I met in the park walking my dog, and she said she was really in an endurance contest to get through the holidays. And she's single, and she's very bright and very isolated. And I thought, today's the day she's going to get invited into the Encouragement Project. So, yeah.
Right. Well, I'm going to take issue with just one thing.
Okay.
And it's because, again, of a conversation we had and then one of your recent Facebook posts. So as we were preparing for this, I told you a story.
Right.
About how a couple of years ago I had suffered a major betrayal from somebody that I had been very good and kind to in a lot of ways. And it was just before Thanksgiving. And so Thanksgiving came, I was here in Philadelphia. I didn't travel to see friends or family that weekend and was pretty down myself, really down. And so through the tears flowing and all of that, as tears flowed, I wrote probably 50 thank you notes.
That's amazing.
I went back and thought about everybody I could possibly think of and whose address I had, because these were snail mail notes. These were not emails.
No.
Some of them were really quite short. You know,
Yeah.
I remember when you did this, and thank you very much. Or you were special in my life at this time.
Right.
And in the spirit of this holiday, I want to say thanks. I never expected to hear back. I sent them all out, and I heard back. I mean, so many people who wrote or called and said, you have no idea, I needed that. I was at a low
Right.
time in my own life.
Right.
Well, you told the story in your post, and I reposted it
Yep.
on my page. And I got responses back from people who said, what? You have a bad day?
Yeah.
I mean, you seem to have it all together.
Right.
So I guess I would say, isn't that a clue that, in fact, we can look at another person and not know
Absolutely.
whether they're having a bad day or not?
Absolutely. Some of the people that are fighting the hardest fight are the ones that look like they are glued together really well.
So I guess we should be sort of indiscriminate.
Absolutely.
Just
Yeah.
encourage everybody, because you
Yeah.
never know.
Yeah, you don't know.
You never know.
You don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the examples we've been talking about so far seem mostly to me about personal life. People you met at the park, or that we may know as family, or as friends, or whatever. But isn't there a role for this in business and in companies and in organizations, in the workplace?
Oh, wow. Yes, sure.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a tremendous leadership skill that is not talked about too much. You know, great leaders develop people around them, and part of developing people is noticing things they're good at, appreciating the things they do, and letting them know that. There are a number of studies that I can't quote right off the top of my head, but that have shown that, you know, salary is probably down on number 3 of the things that people value about their jobs. Appreciation is the number 1. So, you know, and there's really quite a lack of appreciation in many workplaces.
You know, what you say also reminds me of something I've always thought was a little backwards. You know, we wait until the end of somebody's career.
Right.
And then we give them an award or an honor, and we thank them for everything that they've done. Whereas it seems to me that if we took a look at the beginning of someone's career.
Right.
And I've never thought of this as encouragement.
Yeah.
But now, thanks to you, I will. And we encourage those, even those little things at the beginning. Who knows what the trajectory might be, because they are standing on a more solid ground. Would you?
Exactly. You look at every story of every athlete or anyone who's achieved something, and there is somebody in the background that has encouraged them.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of putting it out there. It's like, when I retire, I don't need any, and I don't need
it's
that.
too late.
Yeah, I mean, give it to me now.
Right.
You know, that'll help me for the rest of my career.
It is fuel.
Yeah.
It's the fuel that keeps people achieving or wanting to achieve or taking another risk, because that's big, right? Not everybody risks easily.
Yeah.
And, you know, what I consider a risk, you might not, and vice versa.
Talk about risk. So I've never thought about that from the encouragement perspective, but I'm in the entrepreneurial community too.
Yes.
And dealing with a lot of other startups.
Yeah.
So if I were to send a message, you know, courtesy of Dale, into that community, what would be the couple of things I should tell them?
Well, I mean, I guess my favorite is fear, you know, the acronym for fear. Fear is really just false evidence appearing real. And, you know, what stops people is fear. Stops them from doing anything, depending on the size of the fear, and it can be quite large at times, and big and hairy monster. But the entrepreneurs that can get past that and get used to not knowing how things are going to turn out and are willing to take the step forward every day are the ones that make it, and they learn how to encourage themselves.
So that leads me to ask you to tell another story.
Okay.
One of the things that we also have in common is we've both done Outward Bound.
How about that? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought your story, the particular circumstances, what happened with the death of your friend beforehand,
Right.
your travel to the Outward Bound location, and then your experience there.
Okay.
So that was really quite a challenging time. I
That
can't
was
think of anything
unbelievable.
in my life that's been quite that challenging. You know, but you got through it. But in particular, you addressed fear
Yes.
throughout, especially the Outward Bound experience. Please tell that story.
Sure. Well, that before I went on Outward Bound, my life fell apart. And I think that I consider it my big crossroads. Looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened. But at the time, it just seemed like nothing could ever get worse. And every time I thought that, it did. So it started with my son quitting school in 10th grade because he had serious learning issues and he just couldn't do school anymore. He was very bright. My mom died. 2 of my best friends died. It was that kind of a year. And I did 2 good things for myself that year. I took a personal development course that was about putting your past behind you and creating your future. And at the end of that, I knew I was going to start my own business. But it was really scary financially for me to do that. I had one going to college and one still at home. And so I decided I would do Outward Bound, mainly because I always wanted my boys to do it, and they wouldn't because I wanted them to. So I found myself signing up for it one day, and I figured if I faced my biggest fear, which is heights, I could do anything. And so I planned to go up on the sailing trip. It was 8 days in Maine, out of Rockland, Maine, and I planned to stop and see a good friend of mine in Greenwich, Connecticut, who was diabetic and her health was failing, although she was 5 years younger than I. And 2 nights before I left, her husband called me and said, "I can't believe I have to tell you this, but Diane died last night." So I cried all the way to Maine. I was so sorry I didn't say goodbye. And I got up to Maine, and the morning that we were to leave, the first person I met was 20 years old, which was the age of my son, and I went, "What am I doing?" And as I walked down the gangplank with a young man who was 28, who had just come from being a White House fellow, and he looked over at me and he said, "You know, my mom would never do this." I was getting a little more discouraged every minute. And we got on the boat and we were on the water for 5 days. And then we landed at Hurricane Island and we did rock climbing and rappelling, which were really, really fun. And then the last day, we had to do the high ropes course, and I woke up and the rain was coming in sideways. Somebody yelled in full foul weather gear, and we walked down to the course, which was shaped like the beginning of it was shaped like an H, with the bar of the H being at the very top, and there was this little ladder leaning against the first pole that got you up to the heavy gauge staples that you had to pull and push to get to the top. And I went third. I was too chicken to go first. And I got up to the top of that little ladder and started to cry. And I said to my group, and to no one in particular, "You know, I've been a really good sport this week, but I don't think I can do this." And there was a long silence, and someone said, "This is what you came up here to do, and if you let us, we'll help you." And all of a sudden, I was climbing that pole. I don't know. I have no idea what was that was the push, I guess. That was the encouragement. And I got up to the top, and you come up to a tiny little platform that you have to stand up on. And then you have to walk across the telephone pole. You have a mountain climbing harness on. You're on belay, you're safe. And you know, at the age I was, which was 51, that if you fall, you're going to wreck your back. So the girl that went ahead of me stood at the end of that pole and said, "Just watch my eyes." She was 24. And then she went ahead, and you go up 8 more feet onto something called the Elvis wire, named because this cable is thick, but your feet shake so hard you look like Elvis on it. And there are handholds spaced further and further apart so that you always have to let go, which is the lesson.
So there was one really important thing, though, that someone said to you at that end about, and I'd like you to wrap the story up with that.
"If you let us, we'll help you." And they helped me all the way through.
Yeah. This is so fascinating. I could talk to you for a lot longer, but we're running out of time now.
Right.
And so I want to get to the next steps
Sure.
for anybody who might be watching.
Great.
So for people who want to connect with you, the best way to do that is to go on your website, which is?
TheEncouragementProject.com.
Or they can reach you personally at your email.
Yes, Dale@TheEncouragementProject.com.
And what are some of the things that they would find on your website that they might be interested in?
They'll find different things they can do. They'll find a 7-day encouragement project that they can sign up for. And then I'm on social media, so I'm posting every day on social media and building an encouragement community.
Your posts really are quite nice.
Thank you.
So I wish you well in
Thanks.
building that community. But then you're also writing a book.
Yes.
So would you like to hear from people if they have encouragement stories?
Yes,
Okay.
I would
either
love that.
Encouragement they have received from others, or that they feel that they have given to others and
Yeah.
maybe they've seen an impact.
That would be terrific.
That'd be terrific. And you're also available if people want to talk to you for events that they might be having, or speaking that
Yeah.
they may need for their group.
Yes.
Because of the importance of this topic.
Yes,
as
thank
well.
you.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Dale, it has really been terrific to have you on today. I just want to thank you again for being here. I hope everyone watching is going to take a moment today and encourage someone. Encouragement is not just rocket fuel to make the impossible possible. I believe it's the glue that can help make our connections better and stronger. I know from experience, and you've heard my story, what it's like to be on the receiving and the giving end. Dale's right. It does good, and it feels good. Add an encouragement practice to your life and watch what happens next. Be in touch with Dale or with me if we can help. And let's connect.